Welcome back to Channel's Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka, from our studios here in London. As far as we know, the coronavirus jumped from wild animals into humans in late 2019 in a popular seafood market of Wuhan, China. Less than 6 months later, the virus has killed over 100,000 people, infected over 1 million and paralysed the global economy. China appeared to have managed the crisis, and some have suggested the communist nation is using this success as a tool for soft power diplomacy. It has sent medics, face masks and protective gear across the world, doing so while constructing the narrative coming out of its borders. For more on this, I'm now being joined by international expert in counter-terrorism and conflict resolution, John Essin. John is also the founder of a UK-based think tank, the Global Peace Initiative. John, it's a pretty broad question, but is China winning the geopolitical battle which has come out of this COVID-19 crisis?
A bit of a tricky question, but it depends on who you're asking. Because if you look at China and put it in perspective, China's service and manufacturing industries essentially drive the global chain of commerce around the world, and that essentially affects every country in the world. So, but if you ask any country of the global north, because they have strong institutions and they have advanced democracies, they can stand up to China and say no. Besides, they are looking to reframing the foundations for their economies, because the COVID-19 has really opened a lot of eyes in the West, and they found out that they're overly dependent on China, and they're looking to insulate their economies just to cut out a bit of that. So besides, they also know that China is looking at subverting them and replacing the rules-based international order that has been running the entire world since the inception of the United Nations in 1948 till now.
It's interesting, isn't it, John? Because in some aspects, if you look at the narrative, the global narrative of the fallout from COVID-19, one would think that it didn't even start in China. It seems to be that, you know, that's exactly the way Xi would want the world to frame it. There have been some discussions that even senior foreign diplomats from China that are placed around the globe are even denying that it started in Wuhan. Do you think the world will be as forgiving?
I doubt it, but because of China's influence globally, especially given the fact that it drives most of the world's economy, it's not going to be able to do without China for a while. I mean, some Western countries have decided to cut away from China, but even that is going to take a while, because when the world comes into recession, you'll need China to recover. But China is essentially playing a game it's been playing for years now, and the West is just waking up to it. It's a form of warfare, but the arena of contestation is not what you'd have for, say, conventional state-to-state warfare. But it is a form of warfare that is between peace and war. You're not quite at peace, but you're not in war as well. And China is very adept at this, as is Russia. And these are revisionist states that have done this for a while, and they know what they're doing. It wouldn't be forgiving. But if you ask countries in the global south, including countries like Nigeria that have weak economies and that depend on soft loans from China, they'll tell you how good a boy China has been. So it depends on who you're asking.
Let's talk about quite a shocking announcement. Well, some would say shocking, some not. But US President Donald Trump has said he will be halting funding to the WHO over its handling of the pandemic. There are some suggestions that they've been covering up for China. Most of the stories that we're hearing out of China are conspiracy theory related. Some are far-fetched, including some of the theories about 5G, which we won't go into because the British broadcaster Ofcom won't allow that. But do you think some of these concerns need to be taken more seriously as America and some other brave countries in the global north are doing?
Well, out of 8 or 9 of these incidences in the last uh, 60 years or so, China has been responsible for about 4, maybe more. The Asian pandemic virus in 1957, the Hong Kong virus in 19 about 8 years after that, and then the SARS, and then what we have now. They've all been China, and they've never really been they've never really taken responsibility for it. So I don't know if I think they should be held responsible, and I don't think that the international institutions like the UN and the World Health Organization has actually done enough to hold China accountable. I know that Trump has had his faults in addressing this pandemic eventually when it broke out, even before it became a pandemic. America took time addressing it as well. So I think Trump is a bit upset because he's seen through that as well. But
Yep.
like I said earlier, China is very influential, especially economically, for every country in the world. So maybe that's part of it.
Well, I think a lot of people would agree with you. Of course, some wouldn't. Let me ask you about an article you wrote. A pretty brief article, but you were questioning the Nigerian government's decision to allow some Chinese medics to help with the pandemic, although that's what we believed they were flown in for. It also raised eyebrows with some senior Nigerian health practitioners across the diaspora. What is the concern with this?
I was very disappointed, as were millions of Nigerians, I think, that the federal government took a unilateral decision without due consultation with its expert body. I think it's called the Nigerian Medical Association. That's the premier body of experts in Nigeria, and it should have been consulted before that decision was taken. Because before the contingent of experts, of Chinese experts, made their way to Nigeria, they had come to Europe offering the same services, offering the equipment. But a lot of countries around Europe turned them down because it was deemed that the equipment were substandard and that they were defective. I
Wow.
do not suppose that China will have gone back to China and gone through another process to improve those equipment before taking them to Nigeria. And I don't think that Nigeria will take the time to test this equipment robustly before applying them
I'm sorry to interrupt you, John, but we are running out of time, and I do want to get your opinion on what we've been seeing. We've been seeing it all over social media about the treatment of some Nigerians who are living in China. So much so that some senior ministers, some senior Nigerian officials on the ground, actually tackled it head on. What are your thoughts on this?
China is a supremacist totalitarian regime. That's the way they've rolled. That's how they are. That's how they've gotten to where they have. And I heard their comments that they just did what they had to do. They're friends with Africa, but it's a racist country. What you saw is what they do. Unfortunately, they couldn't cover it up because
China's a racist country. That's quite a
it is
strong allegation,
it is it is
John.
we
Some would call
can
it a global country.
go to what they're doing with the Muslims in what is it called? I can't forget the name, but the camps they have for Muslims all over China. There are lots of things we can go into concerning that, but that's my personal opinion. I think they're racist.
Lastly, John, the Chinese virus. Those were the comments initially made by US President Donald Trump a couple of weeks ago. Of course, it was quickly rebuffed, rejected, and snarled at by the Western world. Do you think if that rhetoric was used again, there would be some that wouldn't be so quick to reject it?
I think going back to what I said initially, if you're a country in the global north, you will be quick to reject it because they have strong institutional structures, that are democracies, and their policy differences on a extreme spectrums compared to China. But if you've been borrowing money and you have China's rules tied around your neck, gradually being tightened, then you'll see how good China is. So it depends on who you ask.
It does depend on who you ask, but John Essen, thank you so much for joining me on Channel's Business Global.